Hello friends, welcome back to your channel Demystify Frontend, and this is the fourth video in the series Build Your Own Angular Forms, where we are creating Angular form from the scratch. So in this video we are going to convert this low level design of ngModel directive into the code. And if you have not watched my previous videos where we discussed this low level design in detail, so I recommend you go and watch that video so that you can gain maximum out of this video. Okay, so but still I'll give the gist of the last video, like where we discussed this low level design in depth. Okay, so first we will have to understand the concept of control value accessor, like why it is introduced in the first place, what problem it solves for you. So you can see there are two pathways drawn here, one in the green line, another in the blue line. So these represent the flow of the data in both the directions, right? One like from the component towards the input, and another is like from the input towards the component, right? So let's pick the first data flow, the one in the green one, shown in the green one. So what happens, like when you apply the ngModel directive on any of the form control. Okay, so in this case let's say it's a text box, so where we applied ngModel. So we are passing one property which is defined on the component. Okay, so we pass it as an input property to the ngModel, and ngModel will basically write that value to that input, and if there is a change in the input, it ngModel will emit that change through this ngModel change event. In this way ngModel implements the two-way data binding, right? But how ngModel implemented in actual, how the ngModel directive is organized to handle both the scenarios, like writing data to the input and reading data from the input and passing it back to the use case component where you where you applied the ngModel directive, right? So ngModel doesn't take care of each type of form element itself, rather it delegate this functionality, this responsibility of writing to the host element and reading the host element value whenever there is a change in the host element to different set of directives, and Angular calls it control value accessors, right? But why ngModel adopt this strategy? Because if you handle all the complexities related to writing to different form elements and reading the form elements values, that will be very complex approach that won't scale very well, right? Because within the single directive you cannot handle all the different type of form controls, right? Because the form controls are different in terms of how you update them, how you manipulate those form controls, and how you read their values, like what sort of events you subscribe to read the values, right? Like for instance, take example of these two form controls. One is the text input, another is checkbox input. In case of the text input, we write to the value attribute, and when we subscribe for the events emitted by the input having type text, we subscribe to the input event. But in the checkbox we don't write to the value attribute, we write to the checked attribute, and again we listen for this change event, right? So you can see there is a some grade of complexity with every form control. And what about custom form control? Yeah, again that also incurs some complexity. So to manage all the complexities involved in handling different type of form controls, so there are special directives already implemented by Angular. These are control value accessor directives. So these directives target a specific form element or group of form elements, right, which they interact with. And the ngModel has to just interface with the, it has to just inject the ng value accessor. This is the di token, right? So ngModel has to just inject this di token, and through this di token it will get hold of the appropriate control value accessor, right? And which is again that depends on like where you apply the ngModel directive. If you apply ngModel on a simple text input, email input, number input, then ngModel will get hold of this default control value accessor. If you apply the ngModel onto like let's say checkbox, then in that case the ngModel will get hold of this checkbox control value accessor, right? So based on where you apply the ngModel, appropriate instance of control value accessor will be created. Okay, so these are the directives which are having specific selectors which target particular host element, particular element where the ngModel is deployed. Okay, so now let's deep dive into the like how we can code this low level design into the actual code. So we will start with the first defining like what a control value accessor is, how it looks like what is its shape, what is its structure. So we will start with defining the interface. So we have already written this interface for the control value accessor. So you can see we have defined two methods. One is the write value, another is the register on change, which accept a callback function. Let's see them in the low level design where it fits. So you can see if I zoom a bit on this default control value accessor, so you can see we from the ngModel what we do, we write to the control value accessor, right? So there must be a method supported on the default control value accessor which we can invoke and which will essentially write to the input element or to the host element where the ngModel directive is applied. Okay, and likewise there should be a mechanism for the ngModel to register for some updates coming from the host element side. So default control value accessor or a control value accessor, it lets you subscribe, it lets you pass callback which will be called whenever there is a change in the underlying host element. Okay, so this default control value accessor in this case is listening for the input event. Whenever there is a change in the input, it will invoke that callback which we pass in the register for change from the ngModel side. Okay, so for any control value accessor, these are the two mandatory methods which should be there. So now let's define a few utility methods in the base control value accessor. So let's write the base control value accessor. So this is the base class which all our control value accessor like default control value accessor or checkbox control value accessor will extend from here. So what do we need here? We need one method on change. So we can have a default on change implementation in the base control value accessor class. Okay, when the ngModel basically for the ngModel directive or any other directive which wants to read update from the host element, they have to register, right, for the changes coming from the host element side. So what they will do, they will pass a function, and the function will be of type something which accept a parameter. Okay, and return nothing, so we can say void. Okay, and the callback which is passed in the register on change, we can simply assign it to the on change function. Okay, likewise we must have a method to set any property on the DOM, right? Because writing onto the host element is writing on their properties, right? Like for the input we are writing to the value attribute, and for the checkbox we are writing to the checked property, right? So what it accept? It accept one key that is again going to be a string, and some value that is again going to be string, nothing. Okay, and this is a directive, so we have to use this directive meta tag here. When we set any property, so we will have to get access to the DOM of that host element. Okay, so let's inject that. How we can inject that? So there are a couple of services provided by Angular. One is the renderer, another is the element ref. So renderer is something we prefer when we update any of the DOM property. Okay, and another is like to get hold of the DOM of the underlying host element, we have to inject another service, that is element ref. So when we write, when we make any update to the property of the underlying host element, all we have to do, we have to make use of this renderer API, and there is a method by the same name, that is set property, and it accepts three things. One is the element, so we already have access to the element, to the underlying host element where we have applied our directive through this okay, so we have to specify the, yes, this private access modifier, only then it will be a class level property. Okay, so this dot element ref, the first argument, this accept as the element where you want to make update in the property. Another is the property, which property you want to update, that is captured in key, and what is the value of that property, that is captured in value. Okay, so this is the basic structure of the base control value accessor, which other implementations of control value accessor, the specific implementation of control value accessors will extend from. So now we know what our control value accessor is like. Okay, what is its interface, how it looks like, what are the methods and the properties it should implement. Now let's code this default control value accessor directive. So let's create another file here by the name default control value accessor or default value accessor. I hope you are finding this series interesting, because this is something which you normally don't see on the internet, because internet is flooded with lots of tutorials which target the the beginner level audience, so there is little for the advanced. Okay, so let's write this now. Okay, so just export the class. So I am basically picking everything, all the naming conventions, folder structure, everything which mimic the original Angular form package, right, so that I don't miss anything from the concept point of view, from the code organization, from the architecture perspective. So we will try to touch every nook and corner of the Angular form package. Okay, so default control value accessor. Okay, so what it should do, it should extend the base control value accessor which we have just defined. Also it should implement the what interface, that is control value accessor, which we already defined. All right, now if you hover over it, implement the control value accessor. Okay, so this is the method write value, and if you go back here, if you see, we have not added any implementation for the write value in the base class of this control value accessor. Why? Because as I mentioned earlier, if you move back to the slide, the way we write to the form element is going to be different, right? For the input, we write to the value attribute. For checkbox, we write to the checked attribute. For a custom form element, we write it entirely different, right? So that's why the control value accessor, the implementation of the control value accessor, they will have the right value implementation that is specific to the host element which they target. All right, so first decorate this directive. Okay, so what are the key configuration we have to define here? Selector. So where this default control value accessor mapped, which element it select, so it should not apply to any random input element, right? So it should support only a subset of form elements, right, and based on some conditions. So first we can apply this directive, we will apply this directive only when we have this ngModel directive already applied, right? So in the selector we can specify it like this: input having attribute ngModel, right? So the input having attribute ngModel, so whenever it finds any input where we have applied ngModel directive, this default control value accessor will also get instantiated. So let's write the implementation for write value method. So we have already defined a method set property, right, to write onto any other property of the host element into the base class. So we can make use of that, and so we specify the property. So whenever this default control value accessor is applied onto the some inputs with ngModel directive applied there, this will write to the value attribute, right? So this key will be the value, and in the value we can specify the value that is passed to the right value. Okay, so it can be string. Okay, if you go back to the diagram, so this is already created, and it has, so ngModel can call the write value method and pass the value which, so there is a write value method already defined here which our ngModel can call, and it will call the set property method which will eventually write onto the host element. Now the question is how ngModel gets access to this, right? So this is a different directive, this is a different directive, but how ngModel get hold of default control value accessor? So that is something which we can achieve through the dependency injection, right? So as you know, we can expose anything through dependency injector. How? If I am able to configure this directive as a service on a particular DI token, I'll be able to achieve that, right? So what we will do, we will define one DI token, one dependency injection token, and we will expose this control value accessor as a service onto that DI token, and ngModel will then inject this DI token, and through that DI token injection it will get hold of the correct control value accessor. Okay, so let's see how we can configure this default control value accessor on a DI token. Okay, so first we will have to define that DI token, that is ng value accessor. Okay, so go back to our control value accessor file where we have defined our interface. We will export one more constant, and that is our DI token. Okay, that is ng value accessor. So it's an injection token, and here we can give a description. Okay, and it also accept one generic type which specify like what type of token it is creating, right? So when you inject the token you will get something, some instance of some service. So what is going to be the type of that service, that we specify as a generic type here, and that is going to be control value accessor, right? Okay, now go back to default value accessor. So here we will expose this default control value accessor as a service, right, via this DI token. So let's define one constant, let's call it default okay. So we are defining one provider, service provider basically. So what a provider look like, it should have provide, okay, sorry, yes, all right. So it should have this one key provide, right? And what it provide this DI token which we just mentioned, that is ng value accessor. And how it provides it, so whenever someone inject this DI token, it will provide the instance of this directive class. So we use existing, and we specify the name of our class here, right? Oh, why is it showing the error? Okay, so it says basically like you can't use something, you can't refer to something which you have not defined already, right? Because we are referring the class name here before we even declare it at line number 12. So to fix this, Angular provide one utility, that is forward ref, right? So it return it accepts a callback which return the reference. So now the error is gone. So we can refer the class name even before it is declared, right? Okay. So this is the provider, and this goes into the providers array, right? So if you are familiar with dependency injection, if you are familiar with how the services are defined, how services are injected, so you should find it relatable, right? Okay, so just specify this provider, right? What is this provider? This is default value accessor. Now, so whenever the instance of this default control value accessor directive is created, it is applied onto a form element. The instance will be created and it will expose itself as a service onto this TI token. Okay. So if you go back to the diagram, we have created the default control value accessor as per the interface we write earlier, and we have also exposed it as a service onto this TI token. Now comes the another part where ngModel will inject this TI token and it will have access to the control value accessor. So let's do that. So let's move to the ngModel. Okay, so this is the ngModel directive. This is the first revision of ngModel directive which we have created in the last few videos. Okay, so now we need to make some changes here. Since we have already defined our default value accessor, default control value accessor, which is mainly dealing in writing to the host element DOM and subscribing to the relevant events which are emitted from the host element, where we apply the ngModel directive and where this default value accessor directive is attached. Okay, so we will remove this code related to the event subscription and related to making changes in the DOM of the host element directly, right? So just get rid of this code. So this is how the ngModel looks like now. Now what we need to do, we need to inject the control value accessor. How we inject it? Through this TI token, right? So let's check that. Okay, we don't need this as well. Remove this. So first define. So when the ngModel instance is created, it will inject the control value accessor, right? Why it inject it? Because it require it to write to the host element and to read value from the host element, right? So it should have a common interface. So irrespective of the fact where we apply the ngModel, like on the input, on the select, on the multi-select, on the radio button, on the checkbox, right? So it should only be worried about injecting the token, and through that token it should have access to the correct type of control value accessor which is mapped as per the selectors we have defined in those implementation of different control value accessors, right? like you see in like you see earlier, default value accessor will apply on all the inputs with ngModel attribute. Okay, so let's check that. So let's inject. So let's define the property value accessor that's going to be of type control value accessor, right? And here um, okay, so this is the, so we will have to decorate this parameter with this param decorator, and that is inject, right? And here we define our di token. Okay, and we assign this to the class variable value accessor. Let's check. Okay, so we are getting some error. Ng value accessor injection token, no provider for injection token ng value accessor. Let me check why is it so. We have already configured this token. Ng value accessor provide is existing. We have defined these. Okay, so we have not exported these directives, right, through this forms module. So everything, whatever directive we are creating, it is part of this forms module, right, which we created in the last videos. So we will have to export, right, otherwise it won't be available to the rest part of the code. So what we are we have one default control value accessor, right? So what was happening, we have not exported this directive from this module. So when we are applying the ngModel here, since we have not exported the default value accessor, so it's not getting, you know, attached here to the input based on this the selector we define here. Okay, no worries. Now let's check. Okay, the error is gone, it is fixed. Now let's check one thing. Let's check is the instance of default value accessor created for all these inputs, for these two input box and one checkbox. Let's check. So let's open the default value accessor, not the default value accessor but the ngModel, and place this here debugger in the constructor of the ngModel, and let's refresh it. Okay, so this is the value accessor, right? Let's check. Okay, so we are getting the instance of default value accessor, right, for the first input. What is the first input, if we can check here? Okay, so you can see the value accessor, the element ref it points to is the, okay, so you can see this default value accessor is getting applied onto the input where we apply the ngModel directive, and what, so this value accessor points to this element reference, that is first name. So for the first name we are getting the value accessor, control value accessor. Okay, move forward. Now you can see for the last name also, where we apply the ngModel directive, this instance of value accessor is created. And one last time, this is the checkbox passport. So again we are getting the instance of control value accessor created. So whenever the instance of ngModel is created, we get access to the value accessor for that particular host element, right? Now what's happening, so what we need to do now? So the first thing ngModel should do, this is the, there can be any property in the component which we can pass as an input property to the ngModel, which ngModel can write onto the control value accessor, which eventually write it to the underlying host element, right? So in the ng on changes, so whenever there is a change detection, whenever there is a change in the property which is passed to the input, we should be able to write it to the control value accessor, right? Okay, let's refresh it. Okay, so it's not writing to the, and the property which we passed to the ngModel are not written on the host elements. So let's check it. First let's check if there is any error. First check if we are invoking, we are getting that call, we are getting that right value call into the default value accessor or not, right? Okay, so yeah, we are getting the correct property for the first, for the second, for the third we are getting this true. Okay, right, so why it is not setting properly? Let me check. Let me check the base class where we have this method, there must be something wrong there. Okay, this element ref, right? So this is a wrapper on the element, on the host element, right? So we need to pass the reference to the DOM node, and the DOM node is captured through this native element property defined on this element ref. Okay, now let's check if it is working. Oh, great, 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 great. Yes. So now you can see the property which we bind onto the ngModel directive for these inputs, right? And these are like synced with the host elements, right? But that's not true with the checkbox, right? We'll come to that. Now this is the one flow of data binding. Any changes in the input, they should reflect back into the component properties, right? But that's not the case, right? So let's implement the second flow, that is whenever there is a change in the input, it should reflect back into the inputs, right? Okay, so let's check. So for that, move back to the default value accessor, right? So this is our directive. So we have not subscribed for any type of event onto the host element, right? So for the input elements, we need to listen. We need to subscribe for the input events, right, onto the host element through this decorator. Specify the event name input, so it will listen for the input events and it will get this event object. So this is actually an array. So the second argument is the parameter which will be passed to the registered callback, right? Okay, so the directive make a subscription to the input event onto the host element where it gets applied, right? And what it will do, it will call the onChange. It will invoke the onChange function and pass it the value, right? So what is this onChange function? So onChange function is this is a callback function, right? So ngModel will have to call this register on change and it will pass a callback function, right, which gets assigned here onto the on change, and whenever there is a change in the input it will invoke that callback, right? So let's go to the ngModel directive now. So all we will have to do now is to make a subscription for the change. Okay, so we will subscribe for the host element updates through the control value accessor, right? Okay, so we can define a function, a method here. Okay, so this is a one-time activity. So where we will set up the view change pipeline. So whenever there is change in the view, it should the ngModel should get the update through that pipeline, right? So let's name it setup view change pipeline, and what we will do, we will register for the change, right? Okay, so in the callback we will be getting the data from the host element. Okay, and we can simply emit our event, it dot emit. Okay, so this is the ngModel change event which will emit the data to the back to the use case component. Okay, so we have already discussed around it in the first video. You can go and check that out in detail. Okay, so now we need to call this function, but we won't be calling it on every change detection, but only once, right? So we can keep one flag. So this is a flag which we'll use to know like whether we have registered our okay. So if we have not registered it, we will call this function, right? So when the directive instance is created, when this ng change is invoked for the first time, during the creation of this directive, we will register for the view change pipeline. Okay, so we will register for this changes. We will subscribe for the changes from the host element. Okay, refresh it. Now you can see we are able to make the second flow of data possible, that is from input back to the use case component. So when we make changes in the input, they are reflecting here, right? Okay, that's great. Yeah, but that is not true for this checkbox, right? Okay, as you can see, our ngModel directive implementation, it is providing the two-way data binding for both the inputs, for both the text inputs correctly, right? But for the checkbox it is not working, right? So why it is not working, let's debug that. So if you write, okay, go to the default control value accessor and just put a debugger into the right value, right? So let's check what value which okay, let's debug this value parameter, right, in the right value method of default value accessor. Let's refresh it. Okay, so for the first name we get Pardeep, for the next this last name we get Rana string, and for the last you can see we get this true, uh, a boolean value, right? And what we are doing here, we are writing onto the value attribute, right? Set property value. But that is not the case with the checkbox, right? When we write on the checkbox, we write onto the checked property, not onto the value attribute, right? So ideally what we should do, we should have a different control value accessor for the checkbox, right? So we should not apply the default control value accessor onto the input checkbox. So we have to exclude that through the selector, right? So what we can do, we can exclude the checkbox input. So this will apply on all type of inputs except the checkbox. So this is the syntax, right? So this is the selector we define. Now let's check it out. Remove the debugger. Okay, now you can see there is an error thrown here, right? Why? Because for the checkbox, this directive, this default value accessor directive, that won't be applied on the checkbox based on the selector we just updated. Now we are excluding the checkbox, right? So since this directive is not applying on the this default value accessor directive is not applying on the checkbox, right? That's why it is not configuring the di token ng value accessor for the checkbox, right? Because if the directive is not creating, then it will also not be exposing itself as a service for this checkbox, right? And if you see in the ngModel, there is a dependency we injected here, that is ng value accessor. So for the normal inputs, for the simple text inputs, we will be getting the reference of value accessor, right? But for the checkbox, we won't be getting it. So we won't be getting any, any service configured on the di token. So that's why it throws this error. Okay, so to fix the error, we will have to define control value accessor for the checkbox. Okay, so let's create one more directive by the name checkbox. Okay, checkbox value accessor. and it will have the same structure as that of default value accessor, right? So first we will have to change the selector, right? So it will apply only on the checkbox. So what we can say here, it should be an input having type as checkbox, and that host element should also have the ngModel applied on it, right? Only then this directive will be applied on that host element. And change the name to checkbox control value accessor, and okay, again, so it will, again, for the checkbox we are not subscribing to the input event but for the change event, right? And when we write onto the checkbox, we write to the checked attribute, so that will change the state of the checkbox when we write to the checked attribute, right? So that will fix our issue. Again, when we read, so when we subscribe onto the change event, we read the checked attribute from the target object and pass that back to the on change callback, which is registered by the ngModel or other directives. Okay, so there is a conflict here. uh, okay, we can see on input change, right? Okay, now we will have to configure this directive as a service onto the di token. Okay, so here goes. So when we have ngModel applied on the checkbox, in that case this di token will give us the instance of checkbox control value accessor, right? For the normal input, it will give us access to the default control value accessor. All right, so let's check it. Okay, yeah, so okay, again we will have to export this directive through the forms module. Okay, only then it will be applied onto the checkbox. Oh great, now you can see. So we have successfully created the ngModel directive with this two-way data binding use case perfectly. So you can see our directive is able to write to both type of inputs, like regular input and the checkbox input. Okay, and we can toggle it off on and off, and we can see the changes we made in the changes we made in the host elements. They are reflecting back perfectly onto the use case component properties, right, which we passed earlier to the ngModel. So now you can see here, um, for the normal input, how you for the so now you saw like for the normal input how the default control value accessor gets attached to the text input, email input, and number input, where we have ngModel directive, and how we configure that directive as a service on the di token, and how ngModel gets hold of the control value accessor, right, through the di token. And ngModel will get hold of different control value accessor, right, based on where we apply the ngModel. If we apply on the regular inputs, we get hold of this. If we apply it on the checkbox, then we get hold of the checkbox control value accessor, right? And how the checkbox control value accessor make update to the checked attribute, and how the default control value accessor make update to the value attribute, right? So this is the implementation for the ngModel directive. I hope you enjoyed it a lot, you learned a lot. So yeah, it's been yeah, I have to put very hard work to gather so many information for you guys. So I urge you to subscribe to the channel, like the video, share the video with your friends, with your colleagues, and stay tuned, because this is just the start, and this is just the few scenarios we have implemented for the ngModel directive. Going forward, we will see like how we can apply it onto the select, right, onto the single select, multi select, onto the radio. So we will have to write the control value accessor corresponding to those form elements, and we will also see how we can write a custom form element. So stay tuned. Thank you very much.